So this is going to be by far one of the most interesting and enjoyable story times I've ever written and recorded. The reason is because this is the exact same topic I discussed in my very first story time that I released on January 1st, 2021, where I did a year in review for 2020. I've always wanted to make another story time similar to it, where I would go through each month of the year and talk about the big things that happened. However, I was unable to do this for the last 3 years, as in January 2022, I was working on my book, and in 2023 and 2024, I was writing story times 47 and 57 respectively. But now that I'm not working on a story time about college since I of course graduated, I figured that this year would be the perfect year to do a year in review. Additionally, as I'll get to in a bit, there's so much to talk about regarding this year just because of everything that happened, so I figured that 2024 would be hands down the best year to do a year in review story time. So today, I thought I would reflect over this absolutely insane year, what all happened, and even hopes for 2025. I'm Zach and this is Storytime 61. On January 17th, 2025. So, this story time is going to follow pretty much the exact format as Storytime 1 did. I'm just going to start off by summarizing the year as a whole, then I'll go over each individual month and the big things that happened in them. Since I already made a whole story time about my last semester of college back in Storytime 60, I'm going to leave out a lot of the classwork, projects, and other academic related stuff I did from January to May, but I'll still cover the major things that happened. I'm also going to share what I thought was the best day of the month and even give each month a rating out of 10, with 10 being a phenomenal month and 1 being a bad month. Then to wrap up the story time, I'll talk about the things I expect to happen in 2025 as well as my hopes for the upcoming year. Alright, now that you all know how this story time will work, let's talk about 2024. Well, that's what I would say, but honestly, I don't even know where to start. 2024 was hands down the most eventful, chaotic, and honestly the most important year of my entire life by a mile. I sincerely think that I will never have another year on this scale, as this year was just so jam-packed with huge milestones, important decisions, and achievements than the previous 6 years combined. And that says a lot, especially when you consider the fact that 2021, the second biggest year of my life, is included among those past 6 years. Yeah, 2024 was absolutely insane. But what I can say is that this year consisted of many extremely important events that will forever shape the rest of my life. From life milestones such as finishing college, becoming independent, and starting my first full-time job to personal achievements such as buying a car and coming out of the closet, 2024 had so many very important things happen that I'm really excited to share with you all. So with that said, let's start with January. The beginning of 2024 started out rather calmly, although it did start with me beginning my final semester of college. After graduating from an early college in December of 2021, where I obtained a high school diploma and an associate's in science a semester early, I enrolled in UNC Charlotte in January of 2022 to pursue a degree in accounting along with a minor in economics. I was just 17 and a half when I started at UNC Charlotte, and now at 19 and a half, I was beginning my final semester. We'll see later on how my age played a big role when we get to May. Anyways, January was a rather calm month, as I had no exams, projects, or really much to do school-wise. January was always like that, as it's always been a calm month, although February is when things usually pick back up. However, I did join the UNC Charlotte swim team this month and regularly practice with the team. Back in 2023, I got back into swimming and managed to beat every single time I set back when I used to swim competitively as a teen, and even set new times in events I never swam before, such as the 200 butterfly, 400 IM, and mile freestyle. So I figured that I would join the swim team so I could get back to doing meets. And that's what happened on Saturday, January 27th, as I had my first meet with the team. This meet was at Clemson, which isn't too far away from Charlotte, but even better, my parents actually live in the direction towards Clemson from Charlotte, so I spent the night with them that night before and they took me over to the meet and watched me swim my first meet since 2022. And it would be a great meet for them to watch, as I swam really well here, getting new best in 3 of the 4 events I swam. My first event was the 50 butterfly, where I got a time of 31.83 seconds, a new best by around half a second. My next event was the 100 IM, where I got a minute and 19 seconds, a new best by over 5 seconds. In the following event, I swam in the men's 200 medley relay, where I swam a 50 breaststroke. Here I got a time of 40.24 seconds, a new best by just under a second. Then finally, my last event was the 50 freestyle, the only event I didn't drop on time, getting a time of 30.47 seconds, 3 seconds more to my personal best. Overall, I had an absolutely amazing performance at this meet, and it was really fun to show off my improvement to my parents, neither of whom had seen me swim in almost 2 years. Now, in addition to swimming and taking classes, I was also working as a peer tutor at my college's tutoring department. This was my third full semester tutoring, as I started tutoring at the beginning of the spring 2023 semester and tutored during that summer and fall. As a tutor, I tutored 7 classes: Principles of Accounting 1, Intermediate Accounting 1, Principles of Macroeconomics, Principles of Microeconomics, Managerial Economics, Business Calculus, and Elements of Statistics. Statistics and Managerial Economics were by far my most popular classes, but my other classes were also quite popular too. For the past year, I was very popular among 2Ds, often being written very positive reviews and being referred to often. 2Ds really liked how knowledgeable I was on all the subjects I tutored and my enthusiasm for them, as it helped me tutor more effectively. That, on top of me just simply loving my job, made me a very effective tutor who had absolutely no problem getting appointments. Now, although nothing particularly interesting occurred with regards to this job this month, I wanted to go ahead and bring it up since it's going to be a huge part of the month of April, but I figured I'd go ahead and introduce it now. And with that wraps up January. Overall, not the most eventful month, but it was still nice to have a calm month before the storm. So for that, I'll give this month a decent 6 out of 10. The best day of the month was definitely January 27th, as I had a blast at that meet and did very well that day. And now we move on to February. This month, while nothing particularly crazy occurred like what we'll see in future months, still had a couple things. I'll start by discussing how UNC Charlotte went under lockdown on Thursday, February 1st. So at around 11:52 a.m., the campus police were notified of shots being fired in Medbane Hall. However, nothing would be done for another 30 minutes, as that's when campus officially went into lockdown for around 10 minutes. I was actually in the middle of a tutoring appointment when this occurred, as my boss came in and shut the blinds, confusing me and everyone else since we've never seen them shut before. Eventually, once it was determined that the call was a hoax, the blinds went back up and everything went back to normal. However, this would cause a huge controversy, as it took campus police way too long to respond to a really serious threat. It's made worse by the fact that we actually had a shooting on campus back in 2019 that unfortunately resulted in 2 students being killed, so you'd think campus police would have taken this threat much more seriously than they did. Now, the next thing I'll discuss for February deals with another swim meet. But before I mention that, I first want to talk a little bit about an upcoming exam I had. So my first exam for my auditing class was on Monday, February 19th. This was a super stressful exam, as I had heard that exams for this class were an absolute nightmare. Additionally, our professor refused to tell us what would be on the exam, so I had no idea how this exam would go. But to make things even tougher, the weekend before that exam, I had my second and last swim meet of the semester. This meet took place at the University of Virginia and required us to spend Friday and Saturday night up there. I was excited about attending this meet, and I was also quite nervous since of course I had the auditing exam. However, I still studied as much as I could while up there to prepare for that exam. Anyways, we took off for the meet on that night of Friday, February 16th. We carpooled, so me and this freshman rode in the car with a junior. We barely spoke, but overall, it was an easy 4.5 hour drive. Then we got checked into the campus hotel. The rooms were typical 2-bed hotel rooms. I shared the rooms with 2 freshmen. I ended up being one of the guys to share a bed with that night, so I had to sleep beside one of the freshmen that night. However, to say that this night was tough would be an understatement, as it would be a truly terrible night that would alter my entire decision on joining the team and swimming entirely. Around the middle of the night, the guy in my bed tried to cling onto me, often glazing on my feet and getting onto my side of the bed. I was freaked out, but didn't think much of it since that could happen when sharing a bed. However, it did keep me up all the way until 6:30, making me absolutely exhausted the following morning. But even worse was when talking with him that morning, he said he couldn't go to sleep until the same time, meaning yes, he was fully conscious when he was touching me. I became really creeped out when learning this and felt very unsafe around him. In fact, I felt so uncomfortable around him that after the meet, I decided to quit the team and swimming entirely because I felt so unsafe around him. Anyways, I ended up joining a group of 3 guys to get breakfast. It was a small breakfast, only some eggs and sausages, but it was the only thing I ate on this day. The team leaders did a really terrible job planning meals. As we did not have dinner the night before, breakfast was pretty much on us, no lunch, and although they planned dinner, I ended up forgetting to order food, causing me to pretty much go almost the entire weekend without eating. Anyways, my performance at the meet on February 17th was not that good, which is to be expected as I was malnourished, dehydrated, and just exhausted all around. But given the conditions I was in, I still think I did relatively well for the events I swam. The first event I swam was the 500 freestyle. Here I got a time of 7 minutes and 41 seconds. This was 30 seconds more than my best time. I had a really bad start, and of course combining that with my lack of energy from everything mentioned earlier, you can guess why I was not able to swim particularly well at this event. Afterwards, I swam the 50 breaststroke. Here I got a time of 43.11 seconds, roughly 3 seconds over the new best I set back at Clemson. And after it, I swam the 50 freestyle and got a time of 30.61 seconds. Again, I was super wigged out, dehydrated, hungry, and just not in good conditions, so it makes sense why I did not achieve any new best. Anyways, that night, the team provided us Panera bread, but what I didn't realize is that we were supposed to order before the meet, and since I never did, I ended up having to go the night without eating. I think the team should have communicated this a lot better, as it wasn't clear that we needed to order before the meet, and as a result, it would not be for almost 20 hours when I'd finally eat again. It would also be super embarrassing for me when I discovered that we were supposed to order before the meet, so that really sucked too. At least that night went a little better, as the guy who I shared the bed with the night before did not sleep in my bed. Instead, the other guy took that spot, and he didn't do any of the weird shit the other guy did, so I was able to fall asleep easier and get more sleep. Then the next day hit, and it was time to go. The guy who drove us up there was also driving us back. However, he was super tired and wanted some rest, so I drove his car back to Charlotte. It was a very easy drive, as expected being a Sunday afternoon. Even though I was super tired and stressed, I had energy to drive, so I did so. Then when we got back to Charlotte, I dropped the freshman off at his dorm and then drove the car over to my dorm, where I was finally back home after a long and very tough weekend. I was so worn out and tired from the meet, and I was also hungry too, as with the exception of the very light breakfast the morning before, I had not eaten anything in almost 2 full days. Therefore, I decided to pull up the dining app on my phone and ordered 2 5-piece chicken strip combos from the campus Bojangles. Once my order was ready, I made my way over to the student union. After a very painful walk over there and back, as I was really sore, I returned to my dorm and could finally eat a meal. To say that this food was great would be an understatement, as it was genuinely one of the best meals I've ever had in my entire life, and I was so hungry that I managed to eat all 10 chicken tenders, 2 large fries, 2 biscuits, and drank 2 large sweet teas in just 15 minutes. Yeah, I was hungry, and I was so happy to finally eat. Afterwards, I took a 3-hour nap, which felt super nice since I was finally in my own bed and was able to sleep in peace. After waking up, I was still kinda hungry, so I went over to the cafeteria to eat dinner, and afterwards I returned to my dorm to study for my auditing exam. If you want to hear more about how the exam went, you can watch Storytime 60. But ultimately, it was this meet that caused me to leave the team. While I was friends with a lot of fellow members, I just did not feel safe being around that guy I shared the bed with that Friday night. Additionally, since the beginning of the year, I started to become demotivated to swim, and this meet was the nail in the coffin that made me decide to officially retire from swimming. So unfortunately, swimming with the team did not work out, but at least I had some accomplishments from it, especially during the Clemson meet. Overall, the rest of the month would be rather easy going. Once my last exam of the month was finished, the rest of the month became super easy and I genuinely felt at peace during that time. In fact, I would argue that Thursday, February 29th was the best day of the month. This was a very easy day, as my 4 o'clock strategic management class was cancelled, and since I had no homework or studying to do, I pretty much ended my day at 3 o'clock, allowing me to go back to my dorm, and I spent the night watching the entire last season of Sword Art Online. But overall, this was a very stressful month, which is not very surprising since February is almost always the worst month of the year. In fact, with the exceptions of 2020 and 2023, February has been the worst month of the year for me since 2018. In 2020, November was the worst month of the year, as it was the month one of my closest friends passed away, the same friend whose death inspired me to start doing Storytime. Then in 2023, that would have gone to January, as I had an unusually good February. But in 2024, February would again not be the worst month, as while it did have its problems, there was one other month later this year that was worse. So with that all said, I'll give February a 3 out of 10. Then we move on to March. Now, January and February were what I consider the calm months of 2024. However, with the exception of October, every other month this year had at least one extremely significant event. While January and February had the swim meets, they are nowhere near as comparable as some of the events I'll be discussing in these upcoming months. For these months, the events I'll be discussing are things related to major accomplishments, achievements, travels, developments, or rites of passage. In fact, many of the things I'll be discussing for the rest of this story time are things that will have lifelong impacts on me, including achievements and decisions that have completely altered my life and identity and who I call myself. A good example of this would be a decision I made at the end of March related to my religious beliefs. Now, before I talk about this, I first want to warn you all that I will be discussing and criticizing Christianity. I know a lot of you watching likely identify with the Christian faith, and I 100% respect your beliefs, but please note that I will be very critical of the faith due to how much harm it has caused me over the years. If you do not wish to hear me criticize the faith, then please click off the video. So, for the past year, I had been deconstructing my religious beliefs. As many of y'all know, I grew up in an evangelical Christian household. I was raised Southern Baptist and was taught that the Bible was the literal word of God, word for word. And as a kid and teen, I was all in for church, since I believed that not being involved would mean me going to hell when I died. But when I attended a youth event called Fuge during the summer of 2018 and was bullied and harassed there by my peers, I started to develop unfavorable opinions of the church. I eventually began distancing myself entirely from church in 2019, and beginning the summer of 2023, I began deconstructing my beliefs and using the critical thinking skills I learned in college. Upon doing this, I recognized that not only were a lot of the beliefs I was taught silly and unfeasible, but many of them were extremely harmful and just hateful. Especially with regards to my church's views on purity culture, minorities, women, single people, people with disabilities, LGBTQ members, and politics. Therefore, I decided that I was done with the evangelical Christianity, as I recognized just how harmful it was and how much of a negative impact it had on me. I coped with this by trying out progressive Christianity, where I started attending a Methodist church not far from my college starting in September of 2023. While I was treated well here, I would stop going here in March of 2024. It was during this time where I started to question the very foundations of Christianity. After questioning and deconstructing some more, I came to the conclusion that I thought the Bible is just a work of fiction and that there's no feasible way that God in the Bible could actually exist, especially after seeing just how inconsistent he is throughout the Bible. Therefore, I decided that I did not want to be a Christian anymore, so I left. I considered the exact date I left Christianity to be Wednesday, March 27th. I was walking up to the student union to order Wendy's when a campus missionary came up to me to talk to me about Christianity. Now, if you've been to college, whether it's a public school like mine or a private school, you've probably seen a billion missionaries and preachers on campus trying to convince you to join their religion. Sometimes they pull you to the side, some of them hold up fire and brimstone signs that seem to be counterintuitive, but no matter which types you see, you've probably had to interact with one of them, and that's what happened here. Some missionary came up to me in front of the student union and showed me some Bible verses and told me about God and stuff. That was when I just flat out told him that I'm not religious and not interested in being religious. He said okay, and then we moved on. Now, while it may not seem like much, this was a huge moment for me. For one, I felt incredibly guilty because it was the first time I ever flat out rejected Christianity verbally. I had only rejected the religion in my mind, so it was a big step for me to flat out say it to someone. But even though I felt guilty, I also felt an immense amount of satisfaction and freedom. Being chained to a manipulative, high-control religion has torn me apart as a person, telling me how I should live and to avoid anything that even dares question the authority of the Bible. It was the same feeling I felt the first time I attended the Methodist church. I felt free from the chains of Christianity, and for the first time, I felt like I was in control of my own life. And after this moment, it would be a lot easier for me to reveal my thoughts, even publicly coming out as an atheist a month later. It would also allow me to have an easier time facing and healing from my religious trauma, and becoming an atheist would also allow me to finally accept certain aspects of myself that I grew up being taught were shameful and abominations. And I'll talk more about one aspect in particular when we get to July. That's pretty much the big thing that happened in March. There were some other smaller stuff that happened, like my book turning a year old and me doing a retrospective video on it, as well as some other stuff. But me leaving my religion was hands down the biggest thing that happened this month, and one of the biggest things that happened this entire year. Because of that, I would consider March 27th to be the best day of this month, as the freedom I felt was just amazing feeling. Overall, I'd give this month an 8 out of 10, as all around it was a good month and a lot less stressful than February. And now we move on to April. So April was a particularly big month for academics, as I did a wide variety of projects for different classes this month that all had their ups and downs that I discussed in Storytime 60. It would also be this month when I publicly came out as an atheist, to which I received an overwhelming amount of support for. Did not come out to my parents, although I'm sure they've probably already guessed that since I haven't attended church in a while. But by far the biggest thing that happened this month was the Reading Day review session. So at the end of each semester, the tutoring department holds large comprehensive review sessions for a select number of classes. I led one of these each semester I tutored. At the end of the spring 2023 semester, I led the session for Principles of Accounting 1. At the end of the fall 2023 semester, I led the session for Business Calculus. And at the end of this semester, I led the session for Statistics. For each of the Reading Day review sessions, I spent around a month and a half preparing. Preparations involved me creating a hypothetical final myself, making an answer key with it that includes explanations for each problem, practicing the material itself and coming up with the perfect explanations for questions, and testing out the technology in the lecture hall that the session will take place in. So these required tons of work and dedication, and I was willing to do that and to make these sessions the best that could be. And this session would be no exception, as I spent a good amount of time preparing for the session. But not only did I put in a ton of time, I put even more time into the session because I decided that I wanted to make this session the best session I could. This Reading Day review session was going to be the last thing I did as a peer tutor, and I wanted to end my year in a half-long position with a bang. So I dedicated a fuck ton of time to this session and spent a ton of time preparing. And then on April 30th, I officially led the session. I had a little over 100 attendees, including some former 2Ds. And needless to say, this session went incredibly well. I did a fantastic job explaining each problem, and I also did a great job making sure everyone understood how I arrived at my answer. But the reception was absolutely insane. So many students praised me for explaining things really well. In fact, my boss's boss, who did the administrative work by checking in attendees, even overheard some students saying that I was better than their professor and I should be a professor myself. She also said that I did super well and led one of the best Reading Day review sessions in the tutoring department's history. In fact, I would be the talk of the town amongst the tutoring department staff just because of how good I did. So needless to say that this session was a massive success and an incredible way to wrap up my time as a peer tutor. So that wraps up April. There was also a lot of academic related stuff, but you can watch Storytime 60 for that. Overall, I'll give April a 5 out of 10, as this was a particularly stressful month overall due to projects and other academic related obligations, although the Reading Day review session by itself made the month far better. It should then come to no surprise that April 30th, the day of the Reading Day session, was the best day of the month. With that said, let's move on to hands down the biggest month of this year, May. May was a massive month for me, as not one, but two really huge things happened this month. The first and most obvious one I'll discuss is graduating from college. So it was this month that I officially graduated from UNC Charlotte with my bachelor's degree in accounting with my minor in economics. Of course, as said before, I started my journey through college in January of 2022, and after over 2 years of studying, I was finally finished with college. And on Friday, May 10th, I put an end to my time in college by participating in the graduation's commencement. Because of how many graduates there are each semester, my college had a total of 4 commencement ceremonies, with mine being the morning of May 10th, consisting of all the business and health majors. Anyways, at around 8:15 that morning, I made my way to Halton Arena, where commencement took place. There I got with some friends, and shortly afterwards, they let us in. After getting in and getting through other stuff, we finally made it onto the court, where we all took our seats and the graduation ceremony began. Now, the first portion was just the chancellor and some of the important people giving speeches and talking about stuff. However, one thing I want to point out is that the chancellor went over the demographics of the graduating class. This was quite significant since we were the largest graduating class in UNC Charlotte's history, but what's super cool was that she mentioned the age range of us graduates. The ages ranged from 19 to 72, with me of course being the 19-year-old. This made me the youngest graduate of the entire graduating class, which is really cool to think about, even if it's kind of expected since I literally became a senior at 17 years old. And after that, it was time to walk the stage. Now, because I chose to call the accounting majors first, and because we were called in alphabetical order by last name, I would end up being the 10th person to walk the stage that day. Honestly, there's not much to say about it. I didn't do a dance or flip like others. I just walked the stage while my family and some of my professors who attended cheer me on. I could say that this was an incredibly satisfying moment, and that feeling stayed with me for the rest of the day. Then came the super boring part, as I had nothing to do for the next 2 hours as they called people, so this was a super boring part of commencement. It also did not help that I got very little sleep the night before, making it super hard to stay awake. Things did get exciting when I saw friends walk the stage, as well as one instance where I got to cheer on a former 2D walking the stage, but other than those, it was quite boring. Eventually, all names were called and we finally wrapped up commencement. We turned our tassels and afterwards, we were free to go. I united with my family and got some pictures. Afterwards, we headed back to my dorm to get my stuff out and move out. Once we got everything packed, we headed for home, marking the very end of my time at UNC Charlotte. And man, it felt awesome finishing up college. And man, what an experience I had in college too. I truly could not have asked for a better college experience, as I achieved so much during the 2.5 years I spent. I also came out with some funny stories too, so needless to say, I think my time in college was 100% worth it. And the best part is that I got the degree with it, allowing me to get a job that pays the bills and helps me make a living. Now, alongside the degree, I also had a full-time job lined up. Back during the fall 2023 semester, I managed to get an offer from one of the Big Four public accounting firms in their Charlotte office for tax. In accounting, the Big Four is a group of 4 massive public accounting firms that provide tax, audit, and consulting services for many of the largest companies in the world. Having one of the Big Four on your resume opens you up for limitless opportunities, as these 4 companies are very prestigious and reputable. So as you might expect, I had very high expectations for this job and was very excited for it, but as we're going to see near the end of the story time, the job was nothing like what I anticipated. I'd begin this job in September, and I'll talk about starting it when we get there. So then that begs the question, what did I do over the summer? Well, my dad was able to land me a purchasing internship at his company. So my dad is a purchasing manager, where he buys parts from his company from different suppliers. His job is to buy the parts at the lowest price possible. So over the summer, I worked alongside him and his coworkers to accomplish the goals of the purchasing team. This was a fantastic opportunity to expose me to office culture and understand how it goes in an office, especially since I did not have an accounting internship like many of my peers. I worked in the office from 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, where I rode up with Dad and then did my work. As for what I particularly did here, I did a lot of the more repetitive tasks for the purchasing team, such as updating prices in SAP and other stuff. But in addition to that, I also did a couple projects that I'll touch on later. Dad was my boss during this internship, although Dad's boss, the purchasing director, also served as another report. But overall, this internship was a great experience, as I learned a ton from it and felt like I accomplished a lot and made a big difference for the purchasing team. I also got along very well with Dad's coworkers and overall felt like I belonged at the company and played an important role. I started this job on Monday, May 20th, and I worked until Friday, August 9th. I didn't exactly accomplish a lot in May, so there's not really that much to talk about with regards to the job for this month, but there will be more to discuss in the following months. And with that all said, that wraps up the month of May. God damn, this month was massive, as I not only graduated from college, but I also began an internship, so it was a huge and overall great month. In fact, I'd argue that this was the second best month of the year just because of my accomplishments and everything I did. So for that, I'll give this month a 10 out of 10. The best day of the month should be super obvious, but it's May 10th, as nothing could beat the satisfaction I had walking a stage and turning my tassel. And now we move on to June. June has historically been one of the better months for me. Of course, this is my birthday month, but June in of itself has always been a good month since it's usually been a relaxing month. However, this year, that was not the case since I was working full-time, although my job was not that stressful, but I was still working. Speaking of which, I'd also start to actually work on projects this month. One such project involves a subsidiary of the company, so the company had recently acquired another company that purchases somewhat similar products, and my job was to figure out what the subsidiary buys and if we could get cost savings through synergies. In addition, I was also in charge of analyzing the prices of parts they bought and comparing their suppliers to other suppliers. I worked alongside someone from the subsidiary, and together we were able to accomplish a lot. We do a lot more in July though, as that would be when we really started to see the good stuff. Now, outside of work, there wasn't anything in particular that happened this month. That is, with one huge exception, my graduation vacation. So to celebrate me graduating from college, me and my family took a trip up to Canada for a few days. We were in Ontario for the entire duration, although we traveled around a couple different places. And by a couple different places, I mean that for the first half of the trip, we toured Niagara Falls. Then for the second half, we toured Toronto. This trip made it the second time I left the US, as well as made Canada the third country I've been to, with the second one being the Bahamas back in 2022. Anyways, the first day of the trip was Saturday, June 15th. We got up early, packed our stuff, and headed off to the airport. Now, I complain a lot about Charlotte Douglas International Airport, as well it's certainly better than Philadelphia. It's a pretty bad airport, and on this day in particular, it was absolutely awful, as it was super jam-packed at the luggage drop-off. In fact, we waited in line for a whole 2 hours because it was so crowded. And the worst part is that once we dropped our stuff, we only had 30 minutes to get through TSA and get boarded on the plane, meaning not only did we not get to eat or go to the shops, but our luggage did not get put on our plane, so we had to wait until the next day to get it. But then we eventually got on the plane. Seems like Canadian planes are built differently than American planes, as there are actually only 4 seats per row as opposed to 6. Therefore, me and my sister sat beside each other while mom and dad sat across the aisle. I spent the ride listening to music and working on my book while my sister was watching some show. Now, there were some pretty cool moments from this flight, as we flew over the mountains of West Virginia, the city of Pittsburgh, and even Niagara Falls itself. We also got to fly over both Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Eventually, after a relatively short flight, we arrived in Toronto. Now, just getting off the plane was already quite interesting. Normally, when getting off a plane here in the US, we take a jet tunnel, as that's how I've always exited a plane when landing in Charlotte, Philadelphia, and Orlando, as I'll get to later. But when we landed in Toronto, we instead took the plane stairs and walked directly on the tarmac. I tried to research why this is, and apparently it's common at smaller Canadian airports, although that's not very helpful since Toronto Pearson is literally the busiest airport in Canada. So honestly, I don't really know. It would also be this way when we flew back home, as we'd take the stairs up onto the plane, although we'd walk through the jet tunnel to get to the terminal. Again, I don't know why, but it's still cool to see this little difference. It was also really cool because we could see the Toronto skyline from where we were standing, as well as some of the surrounding city skylines too. Once we got into the airport, we went through the border security, and afterwards, we went to our rental car. We hopped in and drove to Niagara Falls. Now, I didn't drive in Canada, as Dad did all the driving. However, the roads were very interesting in Canada, as despite these roads being very much urban highways going through big cities, they felt very rural. This is especially the case for Ontario 401 and 407, as despite going very populated places like Brampton and Mississauga, it felt super rural. I guess you can make the argument that they go through relatively unpopulated areas, but it's still super weird to see roads that appear rural in cities that not only have comparable populations to Charlotte, but are also cities that directly border the city limits of one of the largest cities in North America. Now, the road got more urban once we got on the Queen Elizabeth Expressway in Hamilton, as Hamilton is a pretty large city that's sometimes considered part of its own metro area, instead of being part of the Toronto metro area. Although pretty much right after we left Hamilton, the road started feeling rural again. However, this part of the Queen Elizabeth Expressway is super cool, as it's right by Lake Ontario. Now, obviously, we all know the Great Lakes are massive, but you can't really comprehend just how absolutely gigantic they are until you actually see one of them. And that's what it felt like when we were driving past Hamilton, as Lake Ontario, despite being the smallest of the Great Lakes, is absolutely huge. So huge in fact that it almost feels like an ocean. Yeah, these lakes are absolutely ginormous. No wonder 1/5 of all fresh water on Earth is located in the Great Lakes, as these lakes are huge. Now, on our way to Niagara Falls, we stopped in the nearby city of St. Catharines to eat and buy groceries. And even the fucking Walmarts in Canada are different than the US, as the Walmart we entered looked like a Walmart from the 90s. Of course, you could tell you were in Canada from being inside the Walmart since every item had French translations too, but it was still super weird being in such a retro-styled Walmart since it felt like we were traveling back in time. We also ate at McDonald's, which wasn't really anything too different than here in the US besides the fact that the logo had a small Canadian leaf in the center of the M, and there wasn't any sweet tea, which didn't surprise me at all since sweet tea is pretty much exclusively served in the South where we live. After running those errands, we headed over to Niagara Falls. We found our hotel and parked the car. Our hotel was directly in front of the falls, and our hotel room directly faced the falls. I'll talk more about the room in a bit. For now, I want to talk about viewing the falls. So before checking in, we decided to go over to a balcony in front of our hotel, and even from there, we could feel the absolute power from the falls. First of all, the noise it made could be heard from across the entire city, and second, there was so much mist produced from the falls that we could feel it from over 200 feet away. The mist also towered up really high, even higher than most of the high-rises between both cities in both Ontario and New York. The next day, we'd get to experience the real power of the falls by getting really close. After taking time to experience the falls, we then checked into the hotel. Our hotel was a really tall one that overlooked the falls, meaning we could also see the falls from our hotel room. We were also so high up that we could see Buffalo, New York, and which was super cool to see as well. Now, obviously, we didn't have anything to unpack since our luggage didn't arrive until the next day. So after settling and checking into our hotel room, we headed over to Clifton Hill. We did quite a bit over here, including riding the go-karts, touring Ripley's Museum, and rode the Ferris wheel. The Ferris wheel was super cool since it gave us super cool views of the falls. Afterwards, we ate dinner and then we went to bed. But the view of the falls at night was super cool. As the falls glowed up at night, they also shoot fireworks every night at 10 o'clock, so we got to see the fireworks over the falls. Then that brings us to Sunday, June 16th. So that morning we woke up and the first thing we did was get our luggage since it was arriving during the night. Once we got our luggage in our room and got settled, we participated in the journey through the falls. This is an attraction where you get to actually go behind the falls and see the falls from behind. A long time ago, some miners came through and dug behind the falls, creating a multitude of tunnels. This allowed us to get right behind the falls and experience just how powerful they are. And god damn are these falls strong. There was a little balcony behind the falls, which is where we hung out, and you could feel just how strong the falls were with how loud they were and just how much mist was around us. So much that they completely soaked us, although we were provided with plastic coats to keep us dry. Hell, it was so wet around here that I almost risked destroying my phone for some pictures, although my phone lasted through and I got some super cool pictures from behind the falls. Afterwards, we took a boat ride that goes right near the falls. On this boat ride, we got really close to the falls. Again, the sheer power of these falls was just remarkable, as they were just so powerful. And after that, we took a little break. But once break time was over, we headed over to the northern part of the city for the Whirlpool car lift. So before I discuss this, let me talk a little bit about the geography of Niagara Falls. So the reason Niagara Falls even exists is due to the height differences between Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. The water that flows into Lake Ontario originally starts in the St. Lawrence River, a long river that starts in the Atlantic Ocean. The river starts in the province of Quebec, flowing through the provincial capital of Quebec City and the city of Montreal, the second largest city in Canada. Eventually, the river flows into Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario then flows into Lake Erie via the Niagara River, which also forms the political border between New York and Ontario. However, Lake Ontario has a much higher elevation than Lake Erie, which causes water to drip downwind on the Niagara River, therefore forming Niagara Falls. Now, the Niagara River is an extremely dangerous river for both humans and wildlife. Of course, the falls are the main reason for this, but it's also dangerous due to a multitude of whirlpools near the north of the falls, which have killed more people than even the falls themselves. So that's what this attraction was about, as we got to take a car lift over the Niagara River and over the whirlpool. This was a much calmer and peaceful part of Niagara Falls, as this area is very pretty with a lot of untouched nature and cliffs. But what was super cool about this attraction is that the car lift actually crossed into the US twice each direction, meaning we did end up in New York State on 4 different occasions, making this my first time in the city of New York and making New York the 15th state I've been to, 16th if you count the District of Columbia. I also got some pictures while in the New York portion of this ride too, so I got proof of it. And after that, we took another break and then we had dinner. We ate at the Keg, a high-rise fancy restaurant that gives super cool views of the falls. So we ate there and it was pretty good. Afterwards, we headed over to the Skylon Tower. Seems like Canada has an obsession with building towers in its cities, as they have a tower in virtually every big city. Like, of course, the most notable one is the CN Tower in Toronto, but they also, of course, have the Skylon Tower in Niagara Falls and the Calgary Tower in Calgary, and a lot more. But this tower was really cool, as it gave us the view of the falls at night, as well as the fireworks too. It was also high enough for us to see the Toronto skyline lit up, which was super cool as well. After that, we headed back to the hotel and got some sleep. Then the next day, Monday, June 17th, we got up and checked out of the hotel and took off for Toronto. The ride was pretty much the same as the ride to Niagara Falls, just that we stayed on the Queen Elizabeth Expressway through Mississauga and into Toronto, which was definitely more urban than Ontario 407. We then arrived at our hotel, which was right off Lake Ontario. It was also just a couple hundred feet south of the CN Tower. In fact, the center of the hotel had an outdoor pool that we could actually see a lot of the Toronto skyline from it, including the CN Tower, so it was a really cool view. After unpacking our stuff, we headed out and explored the city. So if you don't know already, Toronto is huge. Even though by metro area it's only around the size of cities like Atlanta or Washington DC, it felt like it was the size of a city like Chicago. As for one, the skyline is huge and very impressive, and two, there's just so much to see throughout the city, so we did a little bit of walking. We started by passing by the CN Tower and Rogers Stadium, both of which we'd visit later. We then went more towards the northeast part of downtown, where we ended up finding my then future company's Toronto office. As mentioned, I was started this company in September, and this company was huge, having employees in the hundreds of thousands across the world and locations in multiple countries. Canada, of course, being one of them, and their Toronto office being their biggest office in the country. So it was cool seeing an office most of my fellow colleagues would probably never visit. I'll take a water break. We also toured the subway. So Toronto has a really good public transportation system that makes it so that you don't need a car to live in the city or the surrounding satellite cities. While we didn't ride any trains, we did get to walk around the subway and saw what was all underneath the city. And it felt like we were in a mall, as there were a ton of shops and restaurants. We even had lunch at a Chinese place, and my parents also got coffee at one of the billion Tim Hortons locations in the subway. By the way, Tim Hortons is absolutely everywhere in Canada, especially in Ontario. Like, I'm not kidding when I say that you could find a Tim Hortons right beside another Tim Hortons, sometimes 3 in a row if you're in a very populated area like Toronto. It's wild. After that, we walked around the city some more. We particularly looked at Chinatown, as we've never been to a city with the Chinatown. It was cool, nothing like really to comment on, as it wasn't nearly as vibrant as what you'd see in Los Angeles or San Francisco, but it was still cool. We also saw the graffiti park, and it was super cool, as this graffiti art was incredibly well done and looked incredibly good. Say what you want about graffiti being vandalism, I think it's a work of art. Like, you'd think people who vandalize would be drawing penises or something, but no, they actually create some super cool stuff. Afterwards, we headed back to the hotel. We took a short break, and then we made our way over to Rogers Stadium to catch a baseball game. The Blue Jays were playing the Red Sox, so we got to watch them live. It was a fun game, even if I'm not particularly a fan of either team since my home team is the Atlanta Braves. I do want to comment on Rogers Stadium though, as it's a really cool stadium that can alter its roof. Normally it's an indoor stadium, but the roof can be opened up so that part of the stadium is outside, as was the case for this game. The stadium also has a hotel in it, which is super cool since you could spend the night in the stadium and watch the game from your own personal balcony if you're in a room. And the best part is that you're in the position to catch home runs too. Of course, that's if you're willing to fork in the money, as these rooms are very expensive, costing around 600 Canadian dollars per night on home game nights, or roughly 416 US dollars. And the location of the stadium in of itself is really neat, being right beside the CN Tower and in the heart of downtown, so it's a cool stadium even if you aren't a baseball fan. As for the game itself, the Blue Jays got destroyed by the Red Sox, so they didn't win. However, I don't really remember the game too much, as what I remember most was actually the sun. So being so far up north, the sun set way later than what I'm used to. During the summer, the sun doesn't set until around 9:30, an hour later than when it sets in the summer here in Charlotte. This is super cool to experience, especially since it was still bright outside at 9 o'clock when it would usually be dark where I live. The sun also rises earlier too, as the sun rose before 5:30, which is very much different from where I live where the sun doesn't rise before 6 during the summer. Of course, during the winter, there is much less sunlight, as the sun sets before 5 and doesn't rise until almost 8 o'clock. But still, it was really interesting experiencing this, especially since sunlight is a lot more consistent here in North Carolina due to us being closer to the equator than Canada is. Once the game wrapped up, we headed over to a pizza place that was really close to our hotel. We ordered a pizza and some wings and took it back to our hotel, where we ate and then went to sleep. And then we reached the last day of the trip, being Tuesday, June 18th. After waking up, we walked around the city some more and went over to the CN Tower, where we took the elevator to the top of the tower. Here we got some incredible views of Lake Ontario, the surrounding Toronto skyline, and the skylines of Mississauga, Brampton, Markham, and even Hamilton. We could also see Niagara Falls too, which was super cool to see since we were able to see Toronto from Niagara Falls. However, while the views were really awesome, this was an extremely terrifying experience for me. I'm not a very big fan of heights, especially if there's nothing underneath me like the case was in the CN Tower, so I was quite terrified the whole time we were up here, but I still got some sick pictures and a super awesome view. After visiting the CN Tower, we headed back to our hotel to pack up and check out. Once we did, we drove over to the Casa Loma, a castle that was built and owned by a wealthy knight during the late 19th century and early 20th century. While it was fun touring the castle and learning the history, the castle was hot as fuck. It was here where I learned that air conditioning is actually not all that common in Canada outside of warmer places like Vancouver and the maritime provinces. And while it's not exactly uncommon in Toronto, it's not quite as common as what you'd see here in the US, given Canada's much colder climate. But other than that, it was a cool experience touring the castle around. After that, we headed off to the airport, where we checked in and got on our plane a couple hours later. I think Toronto Pearson easily takes the title of being the best airport I've been to, as it was not crowded at all, had an easy time getting through TSA, and there was quite a lot to offer. Definitely better than flying through Charlotte, and absolutely damn better than that shithole they call Philadelphia International Airport. Fuck that airport. Eventually we boarded the plane, where again we walked on the tarmac and got on the stairs directly into the plane as opposed to entering through a jet tunnel. After a short trip, we made it back to Charlotte, where we got back into our car and headed back home. Overall, I had an absolute blast in Ontario. It was a very fun to experience a new country and visit a place as iconic as Niagara Falls, as well as visit a city as big as Toronto. In fact, after this trip, Toronto even surpassed Philadelphia as the largest city I've been to by population, and Washington DC as the largest city I've been to by metro area. I also had fun exploring everywhere and experiencing Canadian life. So overall, it was a fantastic trip. Definitely want to go back to both Niagara Falls and Toronto again in the future, especially since there was a lot I didn't get to see that I do want to see. Other than that, not much else happened this month. That Friday, after getting back home, June 21st was my 20th birthday. I didn't really do anything too special. I just went to work that day where I didn't tell anyone about my birthday, and nor did Dad. We did get to go out to eat that night, but other than that, I didn't do too much, which I like since while I do think of my birthday as special, I usually prefer to keep it more to myself and celebrate alone, which is what I got to do. And that wraps up June. Overall, a very good month, as I was starting to see some success at work, and of course the Canada trip was super fun. Therefore, I'll give this month a 9 out of 10, as it was a great month with a lot going for it. I honestly can't say for sure what the best day of this month was, as it could really be any of the days from my Canada trip, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably go with the Sunday, June 16th, as getting really close to the falls was super cool. Now let's move on to July. This is a big month that was filled with work, successes, another vacation, and a huge identity crisis I finally overcame. So to start, I think we should talk about the identity crisis. Now this identity crisis kind of intertwined with my religious upbringing and leaving my faith. In fact, it is because I left Christianity that I was finally able to overcome it and finally accept myself for it. Now, growing up in the evangelical faith, I was taught that being LGBTQ or even supporting it was not only a sin, it was an abomination. I was taught to quote-unquote love the sinner, hate the sin, which really meant hate the sinner because obviously you can't change your sexuality. Anyone who says they love the sinner and hate the sin is lying, as they always hate the sinner and usually refuse to even associate with anyone who is LGBTQ. Now, at first, I didn't really have any issues, as I always thought of myself as heterosexual since I only ever had attractions towards women. But that would all change in May of 2021, when I was 16 years old. It was here where I began to have same-sex romantic and sexual attractions, the very worst thing I could ever have according to my religion. That was when I realized that I'm actually bisexual. Now, as you might expect with my religious upbringing, I was scared shitless upon realizing this, as I now felt that I was in a position where I would be going to hell, even though I was quote-unquote saved. Having same-sex attractions is seen as the worst of the worst by evangelicals, including at my church at the time, who were strongly against being LGBTQ and were just downright homophobic. Therefore, for the next 3 years, I would put myself through a self-induced conversion therapy, where I would attempt to repress my same-sex attractions, often ranging from praying and constantly begging God to remove it, to shaming myself for having them, and even punishing myself whenever I found myself attracted to another man by calling myself insults and sometimes slurs. But as we all know, sexuality is not something you could change, as it's something you're born with. So of course none of my tactics worked, as no matter what I tried, I still found myself attracted to other men. Thankfully, it was very easy to cover up this battle since I had in my brain, as since I'm also attracted to women, I could still relate to my straight peers and even pretend that I'm 100% straight. And, as said before, this would go on for the next 3 years. Even as someone who supported the LGBTQ+ community, which in of itself went directly against my church's beliefs, and even tried to out progressive Christianity and attended an LGBTQ affirming church in 2023 and the beginning of 2024, I still refused to admit that I was bisexual. And it would not be until over 3 months later when I finally admitted it to myself. At this point, I began to see the hypocrisy and sheer stupidity of trying to claim I'm straight, as no matter what I do, I'm never going to be entirely straight. And so on Monday, July 8th, I officially accepted myself and began identifying as bisexual. Now, I was still very much in the closet, as I decided that for the time being, I would keep it a private thing. I did however tell Alex, my best friend. He fully supported me, which very much paved the way for me to eventually come out publicly a month later. But needless to say, officially accepting my sexuality was nothing short of relieving. Telling myself I was this complete abomination simply for attractions I can't even control did a lot to me mentally and greatly affected my self-esteem. So finally being able to let this go and be who I want and love who I want made such a massive difference for me and made me feel like I'm actually a human and not some disgusting being. It felt just as liberating as leaving Christianity, as throwing away these toxic beliefs for healthy beliefs that encourage me and make me feel worthy was an incredible feeling. So that's by far the main thing that happened this month. Work also went well this month. While things got a little more stressful this month, as my dad's boss was really pushing on progress, I still managed to get a lot done with that subsidiary, even getting some cost savings results in, which I'll touch on when we get to August. But what I do want to focus on for this month is the other big project I worked on this while at this internship. So this project was not necessarily related to purchasing, as it was more of an organization type thing, but I still learned a lot from it and gained valuable experience from it. So for a long time, the purchasing team had been using a V drive to store and share documents and folders. And by a long time, I mean that the V drive is so old that there are plenty of documents in there that are older than I am, with some even dating back to the 90s. Now with the V drive this old, you can probably expect that it's huge as well. And you'd be right, it's so huge that oftentimes, we have to traverse through 15 different folders just to get where we want. So my job was to organize the V drive in order and to make it not this long and to get the different folders. And how did I fix it? Well, I didn't. I instead decided that we should discard the V drive and switch to a file sharing group on Microsoft Teams. Not only would this allow our files to be kept on a cloud-based system, but it would help immensely with the clusterfuck that was the V drive. So that's what I did. I created a group on Microsoft Teams and added the NAFTA purchasing team, and then organized the system. And overall, this is a fantastic idea, as it helped a ton with the V drive mess. But in addition to that, there would also be an unforeseen benefit that I didn't even expect would happen as a result of switching to Teams. I'll talk more about that when we get to August, as it would be in August when I finalized the system for the purchasing team and onboarded them onto the system. Now, outside of work, I would also go on yet another vacation this month. So my uncle and his 2 kids live in Dover, Delaware. We usually go there once or twice a year, and we decided to go up there this month for a few days. And that's what we did for Saturday, July 20th to Tuesday, July 23rd. Honestly, this trip wasn't really that memorable, as we did not do a whole lot. In fact, the only thing I really remember is attending their church on Sunday, July 21st. The first time I attended church since March, and as of this story time, the last time I ever attended a church service. And hopefully the last church service I will ever attend. While I was and still am not out to my parents as an atheist just yet, they didn't force me to attend church that summer and didn't even expect me to pray over family meals, which is why I think they already know that I'm not a Christian. And if they know I'm not a Christian and never forced me to attend church or pray because of that, I am very much appreciative of them respecting my beliefs. However, since we were going with other family members, I didn't get out of this church service, so I had to suck it up and attend. It wasn't anything too bad. The preacher just kind of talked about random shit, and thankfully didn't get too political or homophobic like what the preacher at my old church did all the time, but still boring and not the best since I was at church. Now, even though actually staying at my uncle's was rather uneventful, the ride back was quite eventful, as we decided to stop in Washington, D.C. to do a couple of things there. Even though we go through Washington all the time to get to and from Delaware, we only ever spent time in the city once, where we went with my uncle back in 2021 to tour the National Mall. So we stopped in DC and visited the US Capitol building. We got to explore the building, learn its history, and see a lot of cool stuff from the building. We didn't get to do too much because Congress was actually in session during this time, but it was still cool seeing the US Capitol, the most powerful building in the world and where some of the world's most important decisions are made, as well as where some of the world's most stupid decisions are made too, since we all know Congress is filled with a bunch of fucking idiots who can't run a country for shit. After that, we went over to the Holocaust Museum. It was a very interesting experience, as they have a lot of stuff directly taken from concentration camps for the show. It was a really eerie feeling walking through, which definitely fit the theme perfectly, knowing just how much of an atrocity the Holocaust was and how many people lost their lives from it. Once we finished that up, we hopped back onto our car and headed home, wrapping up the last vacation in the summer. It would not be the last trip I did this year though, as I'd actually go on yet another trip in September, although it wasn't a vacation, as it was actually a business trip, which I'll talk more about when we get there. And that pretty much wraps up July. Like June, it was also a big month, especially with it being the month that I finally accepted my sexuality, as well as the progress I made at work. It was also a good month, and while quite stressful at times for work, it was still a good month. So for that, I'll give this month an 8 out of 10. The best day of this month will go to Friday, July 5th. This was by far the best day of my internship, as very few people attended work that day since it was the day after July 4th, so I pretty much got almost nothing done. Hell, I even took a breakfast at 9 in addition to a long lunch at noon and left early, so it was a good day. And now let's move on to the second biggest month of the year, August. This was an absolutely massive month for me, as just like May, it would be jam-packed with huge events and milestones that shaped 2024 into the year it was. To start, how about we discuss the end of my internship? So my last day with the company was on Friday, August 9th, but despite being my last week, this week would also be the most productive and rewarding week of my internship. It was during my last week when the suppliers we reached out to gave us quotes, allowing me to calculate the cost savings between the quoted prices and the prices of the subsidiary's current supplier. While I was expecting some cost savings, I did not expect to find over $100,000 in cost savings, which is exactly what I managed to get. Once I finalized the cost savings, I created a presentation where I compared each of the suppliers and the cost savings from each of them and gave it to Dad, who then presented it to his boss. After I left the company, Dad actually traveled to Nashville where the subsidiary was, talked with the purchasing team over there, and got these savings into place, officially saving the company over $100,000. Now, that wasn't my only success from work that month. In addition, it would also be this month when I finalized the new organizational system. So in order to introduce the team to it, I scheduled a meeting with the NAFTA purchasing team, consisting of Dad, his coworkers, his boss, and the buyers in the Mexico office. During this meeting, I introduced everyone to the system and onboarded them onto it, showcasing where things go and how to keep the system organized. Everyone was very happy about the new system and everyone soon got accustomed to it. But on top of finishing a new system, there was also an additional benefit that I didn't even know it would have. So a little while after I left, Dad opened up a file that his coworker was using already. Upon opening it, he saw his coworker moving around and making edits in real time. This meant that with this new system, the team can now work on the same document at the same time. The team still uses the system to this day, and it works way better than the V Drive, solidifying the fact that my internship was very much well worth it since I was able to make a huge difference for the company. And then on Friday, August 9th, I had my last day. It was a good day. While I mostly spent the day finalizing stuff and offboarding, I also got to say bye to Dad's coworkers and the rest of the company. While it was sad leaving the company, it was very satisfying since I was leaving after lots of accomplishments and learning an absolute ton as well as making good money. So it's safe to say that this internship was extremely successful, and I'm very grateful to Dad for giving me this opportunity to work under him and the rest of the purchasing team. And the best part is that this internship ended up being even more useful than I anticipated, as we're going to see how it helped me when we get to December. So that's that. So that's the first big thing that happened this month. The second big thing that happened this month relates back to July with regards to my sexuality. Now, I was still in the closet and had only told Alex as well as a couple of other friends. Nobody else knew it, and it was still a huge secret. However, on Tuesday, August 13th, I officially decided it was time for me to be open about my sexuality. So I decided to take it to Instagram and officially come out of the closet to my friends, sister, and cousins. It was hands down one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. A lot of people tend to have very bigoted views toward the LGBTQ community to try to dismiss, let me repeat that. A lot of people tend to have very bigoted views of the LGBTQ community, where they'd often try to dismiss coming out of the closet as something people do to get attention. At least that's what people at my old church did, given how homophobic many of them were. But my experience alone disproves that, as coming out of the closet is probably among the scariest things one part of the community can do. And it's even scarier when you're like me, who was raised in a high-control religion that condones homophobia. While I was openly an atheist, I still had friends and of course family who I didn't feel would accept me, so me coming out of the closet meant possibly losing their trust and being cut off as so many people who come out have unfortunately experienced. But despite just how scary this was, I decided to do it anyway because I felt that by revealing to the world that I am in fact bisexual, it would help ease my religious trauma and allow me to feel more comfortable in my own body. And as it would turn out, coming out would be an absolutely incredible decision, as I've received an incredible amount of love and support from my friends and my family members who followed me. It felt amazing knowing that my peers supported me and still respected and cared for me no matter what my sexuality is, which was an incredibly comforting feeling. My sister was also really supportive too, as we talked for a while later that day. Overall, it was an amazing decision that did end up helping immensely with trauma and liberated me further from the chains of my former high-control religion, as I never felt more comfortable in my own body until I finally accepted my sexuality and came out publicly. Now, I'm not entirely out of the closet to everyone I know, as I still haven't and probably will never come out to the rest of my family. In fact, the only family members who know I'm out are my sister, 2 of my cousins, and my grandmother. My parents nor anyone else knows. With my parents, I do intend to eventually come out to them one day, and by one day, I mean today, as I'm sure they're watching the Storytime. So, Mom, Dad, if any of y'all are watching the Storytime, I'd figure I'll let y'all know that, yeah, I'm bi. I'm also an atheist too, although I'm sure y'all figured that out a long time ago. Then for the rest of my family, I'm probably never going to come out to them, as they're all much more religious than my parents and would probably not take it too well to learn that I'm bi, and especially not well at all if they discover I'm an atheist, so I'm probably not going to come out to any of them. Now, one benefit of coming out that I don't have to hear people talk about it much is the freedom of expression. When you're out, you can very easily express yourself however you want. While this is mostly done by people who come out as transgender, many of my gay peers do this too by getting their nails done, going on same-sex dates, and wearing gay-affirming clothes. Personally though, I've decided not to do any of this. While I wouldn't mind getting my nails done or wearing more quote-unquote expressive clothing, I personally just don't really care to do much of this, as I'm not really that expressive of a person. While being bi is a very important part of my identity, I don't really express it or make it a part of my personality, as it's nothing all that special since it's not uncommon for men to date other men, especially in 2025. After all, I don't make my race or gender a part of my personality, so I don't see why I should make my sexuality part of my personality either. I'm sure some people in the community would disagree with me on this, but that's just my take on it. Now, while I don't care to make being bi part of my personality, I still think it's okay and good to be proud of my identity. After all, the LGBTQ+ community has been the subject of persecution and hate for literally almost all of human history. It wasn't until 2003, just 1 year before I was born, when my home state of North Carolina decriminalized homosexuality, and that was only because the Supreme Court made it legal. And then it wasn't until 2014 when same-sex marriage became legal in my state. So seeing the progress we've made and seeing now how it's perfectly acceptable for me to be openly bisexual, when just 30 years ago it was illegal, is really great to see, and it's good to celebrate it. I'll talk more about how I started celebrating and embracing my sexuality when we get to October. With that said, let's move on to the third big thing that happened this month, as well as probably the biggest thing that happened this year, moving out and being on my own. So with me starting my new job, I knew that I would need to find a place to move to. While my parents were willing to let me stay at their house, the main problem with that would be that I would have to commute from their house to uptown Charlotte, where my new job was, which combined to traffic equates to around a 50-minute drive each direction. Therefore, I figured I would instead live near work, so not only would I simply have to just walk to work, but I'd also have a lot more to do. So that's what I did. I searched around apartments throughout uptown Charlotte until I found one in particular that I liked. I went to tour it on Sunday, August 10th, and was super impressed with it. So I applied for a one-bedroom unit, got approved for it, and signed my lease for a few days. Now, before I talk about moving in, I figured I would first talk about the apartment itself. Now, before I do, I'm first going to give a disclaimer. I won't be sharing too many details, as it's where I currently live and I obviously don't want to be doxxed. Anyways, the apartment I signed a lease with is in a high-rise in uptown Charlotte. I live on its 10th floor, and the apartment has quite a lot to offer, including a pool, a lounge, a business center, and more. It's just a 10-minute walk from where I worked, making it super convenient to get to the office. I'm gonna take another water break. Now, as for my unit itself, it's a very spacious one-bedroom, one-bathroom unit. It has a full-size kitchen, a sizable living room, a balcony that overlooks the rest of the second ward and south end, a walk-in closet, and a full-size bathroom. It comes with a large refrigerator, a dishwasher, and a washer and dryer in-unit. It's in a great location too, being very close to tons of restaurants in Uptown and South End, Bank of America Stadium, and of course my job. And it wasn't the only place I looked at, as I also looked at 2 and 4th Ward and a couple in 3rd Ward, although each of them had very glaring issues that caused me not to sign a lease with them. Whereas this apartment, while it has its issues, was very obviously the best pick of the ones I looked at. I also really liked it the most and felt the most at home at it, which is why I chose to sign my lease with them. As for when I moved in, that would be Tuesday, August 20th. So the week before, I spent a lot of time packing up and of course getting ready for the move. In addition of packing my stuff, I also bought some things for the apartment. Among the stuff I bought was a couch, a queen-size bed, and a 75-inch TV. The apartment happens to have a system where you can buy stuff like the things I just mentioned and have it shipped to the apartment before you move in, and they'll hold it on for you. And that's what I did when I bought this stuff, is I had it shipped to the apartment and the property management held onto it. Hell, I was even the talk of management when the TV came in, as the managers even placed a bet amongst themselves on how much they thought it cost. None of them were particularly close, as I paid $500 for the TV and the closest estimate was $650, but still really funny nonetheless. And now let's talk about actually moving in. So this was a wild day. I woke up that morning, got some last minute stuff, and then headed over to the apartment. I of course drove my truck and hauled off a lot of stuff on it, including my gaming chair and a cabinet my cousin gave me, as well as some stuff I had bought at Walmart the day before. Once I arrived, I did some more paperwork, paid my move-in fees, and got my key and got a parking tag for my truck. I then parked my truck in the resident parking spaces and then began moving stuff in. Moving my stuff in was not that hard, as property management provided dollies, so I used one to carry my stuff. But then, once I got all the stuff, it was time for the hard part, unpacking. I first unpacked all the stuff from my bed and mattress. Later that night, my parents came and helped me set up my bed and brought some more stuff, so I figured that I would go ahead and unpack that stuff to make it easier for us. Then I went to the couch. However, the couch was wrapped in a ton of cardboard and plastic. Now, this would normally not be an issue, as I'm quite the expert at destroying cardboard, as I previously worked as a stocker at a grocery store as a senior in high school, and whenever I reported to work without my razor, I'd simply punch the sides of the box and easily be able to open them. But this couch was wrapped in way different than boxes. meaning I absolutely needed a razor. But the only problem is that while I still have my old razor from my stocking job, I put it amongst the things my parents would take with them, so I was left without it. And to make matters worse, I didn't even have a pair of scissors, so I moved on to the TV, only to realize that to put the stands in, I needed a screwdriver. Therefore, I needed to go to the store and buy a pair of scissors and a screwdriver. Luckily, that wasn't too big of an inconvenience, as I already had plans to go to Walmart anyway, since I also needed to buy an air fryer and some groceries, so I took a break from unpacking and headed off to Walmart. Now, one realization I made when planning out my trip was that I had a ton of options as to where I wanted to buy my stuff. What I mean is that there are a ton of stores in Charlotte thanks to the city's sprawl and large area of coverage. In fact, there are 7 Walmart locations in Charlotte spread across the whole city, as well as locations in the nearby suburbs of Belmont, Huntersville, Matthews, Topeka, and Topeka K. Now you might be thinking, Zach, you've already lived in Charlotte for 2.5 years from attending UNC Charlotte. You should know this already. However, University City, the neighborhood I lived in, is in the very northeast corner of the Charlotte, right along the Cabarrus County line. Therefore, there were only 2 Walmarts that were really close to me, being the one in University City and one near Concord Mills, whereas all the other locations were further away, and the same goes for the other stores too. But being in Uptown, I have many more stores within my proximity since I'm of course in the center of the city, meaning I could go anywhere and drive virtually the same distance, with maybe a couple minute differences between stores. And in this case, I went to the Walmart off Independence Boulevard in East Charlotte. I went here and bought my stuff, and then returned to my apartment, where I put my groceries up and used my scissors on the couch and the screwdriver on my TV, fixing up both. I still often go to this Walmart to buy groceries, although if I need to get gas, I usually go down to TK Walmart since South Carolina has cheaper gas. Then a few hours later, my parents and sister made it to my apartment and bought some more stuff with them. Dad and my sister helped set up the bed while me and my mom worked on the trash, as I had piled up a fuck ton of trash from unwrapping the couch, TV, bed, and other stuff to the point that it was actually starting to pile up into the kitchen from the living room. So we got it all cleared and got the bed set up, allowing me to have somewhere to sleep that night. And that's how move-in day went. Overall, it went very smoothly and began day 1 of me living by myself and being independent. Now, I still didn't have everything just yet, but I would that Saturday, as my parents came that day to help set some more stuff up. Additionally, I was also having issues with the internet. I was supposed to have AT&T come in to set up my internet that day I moved in, but during this time, they were on strike, so nobody could come. Therefore, they rescheduled for that Sunday, August 25th, which I was fine with since I didn't exactly need the internet since I hadn't started my job just yet and figured I could go a few days without it. However, that Friday, August 23rd, AT&T called me to let them know that they would not be able to set up my internet until September 9th. This is a massive problem for me, as my job started on the 6th. Therefore, I decided that I would just use another provider since I really needed my internet and couldn't be waiting that long just so some technician could come in and set it up. So I told them to forget it and that I would be switching to a different provider. And that's what I did. I switched to Spectrum and was able to get my modem and router on Saturday, August 24th, the day my parents arrived. In fact, that morning, the first thing we did was that my parents took me to the Spectrum store in South End to pick up my gear. We then brought the stuff back to my apartment, where they worked on hanging my TV on the wall while I worked on the internet. After a little while, we were able to get both working, meaning I now had a mounted TV with high-speed internet, which made my place feel much more like home. So yeah, I officially moved out of my parents' place and could now begin my adult life. So far, my adult life has been great, although it has had its fair share of challenges as we're going to see in the last quarter of the year. And that wraps up August. God, this month was absolutely huge with a ton of stuff occurring, but I made it work and ended up having an absolute banger of a month. In fact, with everything that happened, August ended up being the very best month of the year for me. So for that, I will bestow this month with a 10 out of 10. The best day of this month was definitely August 20th, as officially moving into my own place was very satisfying and accomplishing. So now let's move on to September, another major month from this year that while it had its good, it also had its bad. I'll start with the first good, being me starting my new job. So as a reminder, I got a position as a tax associate as one of the big 4 public accounting firms in their Charlotte office, which is located in Uptown Charlotte. I was placed in their insurance tax practice, which is a sector of tax that does tax provisions and returns for insurance companies. Now, this is a very interesting sector for me to be placed in because, well, There's nobody else in Charlotte who does insurance tax besides the managing partner who's over the whole sector, and due to his job responsibilities, he travels a lot, making me the only insurance tax employee in the Charlotte office. At first, I thought this would be great, as this meant that I could work from home more. However, I'd quickly learned that this was actually a complete nightmare, especially for me as a brand new associate. I'll talk more about this as well as some of the other negatives about this job when we get to October, as that's when it would really start to affect me. For now, let's talk about my first day at work. So I was not the only new joiner, obviously. In fact, I was one of over 1,000 new joiners from that day, and that's just new joiners in the US. That doesn't include the new joiners in Canada, the United Kingdom, and other countries where my country has a large presence in. And what's even crazier is that there is also a cohort that started in June and another in July, which just comes to show just how absolutely massive my company and the other big four firms are. Anyways, this day consisted of conference calls where the onboarding team introduced us all to the firm and went over some stuff about the firm, such as the different programs and firms uses, as well as firm policies and other stuff. During these calls, they showed us how to do things like charge time, schedule vacation days, and how to use some of the softwares. And yes, even though we're salaried, we still had to clock in and out, as the firm, as well as most other public accounting firms, recognize revenue from hours that their employees charged the client for. Really stupid in my opinion, since we're salaried and not waged, but that's just how it is in public accounting. Overall, other than these conferences, it wasn't all that eventful. I didn't meet anyone since of course this is a remote day, although I would still get the chance to do so the following week. Nonetheless, it was a good day to mark the start of my first full position. On the contrary, however, the following day was not a good day at all. So Saturday, September 7th started off good. My parents came that morning and got some more stuff and cooked lunch, so it started well. However, one thing my apartment really needed was bar stools. Between the living room and kitchen, I have a bar area, but not stools, so I figured that I would run up to IKEA to get some stools. So I hopped into my truck and headed off to IKEA. However, I would end up not making it to IKEA. You see, while I was in the middle lane on I-277, some complete dumbass in the right lane thought it would be a good idea to merge into my lane while I was there. Since they were likely distracted and probably on their phone, this asshole just merged in my lane without seeing that I was right there. I noticed them right before they hit me and immediately got scared, so I swerved over to the left lane, only to lose complete control of my truck. As a result, I swerved for a little while until I hit a barrier. That worthless piece of human garbage who merged into my lane didn't even bother stopping. In fact, they even sped up and got away before I could get their license plate. I did at least have a witness who stopped and helped me out. He didn't get their plate either, but he did see everything and helped me calm down. He suggested I move my truck to the right bumper to be in a more safe area and to let cars go, as a traffic jam had built up after the wreck, so we did that. Once we did so, I called the police and told them what happened, where they eventually arrived 20 minutes later. Me and my witness gave a record to the police and talked about what happened, and while police unfortunately couldn't do much since none of us got the tag, they at least gave me a report number to file with insurance. I also called my parents too to let them know what happened. They offered to come up and check out the truck, which I was more than thankful for. And that's what happened. I pulled into an empty lot and my parents soon met me, where Dad took a look at the truck and did some tests. While the truck was still drivable, even with its lights and blinkers still working, there was fluid dripping out. Therefore, we decided it would be best to have the truck towed to the mechanic so he can take a look at it. So they did that and then took me back to my apartment. Unfortunately, I did not receive good news from the mechanic. Apparently the fluid that was dripping was the antifreeze, a major component of vehicles to prevent the engine and other components from freezing. There was also a bunch of other mechanical problems too that unfortunately made the truck undrivable and unrepairable, so my parents scrapped the truck, leaving me without a car for the next 3 months. Now, thankfully, I didn't necessarily need a car, as I of course lived and worked in Uptown, which was definitely convenient during this time. Therefore, I decided to go the next few months without owning a car. While doable since I didn't have to drive to work, this absolutely sucked because Charlotte is one of the most car-dependent cities in the US, which in of itself is one of the most car-dependent countries in the world. Therefore, I was stuck with taking public transportation or Ubering if I needed to get out of Uptown, which was never convenient since these cost more than just driving my own car. Now, there was initially the problem with me getting groceries. Luckily, Mom has a Walmart Plus subscription, and she let me use her account to buy groceries, which I'm very thankful for since I did not want to have to spend double the amount at Whole Foods. However, there was a good side of me not driving, that being that it would be good for me mentally too. The wreck had me completely shaken up, and immediately after the wreck and for some time after the wreck. After all, this wreck very easily could have been fatal, as I actually hit the barrier while over a bridge. This meant that had I spun out clockwise instead of counterclockwise, I could have fallen off the bridge and died that day. So on top of being a wreck, this was also a near-death experience that really traumatized me for the next month and a half. So the fact that I was without a car for the next 3 months definitely helped with easing my trauma, since it gave me some time off the road. Now as for the bar stools, I still have yet to buy them. Since I'm likely going to be moving out of my apartment this May for reasons I'll explain when we get to December, I figured that there's no reason to buy bar stools now, and honestly, they aren't a necessity, so it's not a big deal that I don't have them. Now, at least after the wreck, I didn't really have a lot of time to just sit around and let it distract me. I didn't have a lot of time to sit around and let it distract me, as the following week would be a huge week for me. From Monday, September 9th to Thursday, September 12th, I attended my company's new joiner startup program in Orlando, Florida that they held for all the new joiners. Here, they kind of did the same as the online conference, but since it was spread over a couple days, they could go over more, and they also taught us about the different programs in our specific area. It would also be here where we learned what sector we were in, where I of course learned I was in insurance tax. Anyways, on the morning of September 9th, I woke up, packed some more stuff, and then eventually my Uber arrived. My Uber then took me to the airport, while I got off and went through the standard airport procedures. Now, my experience at Charlotte Douglas this time was way better than it was when I flew to Toronto 3 months prior. Because I was only bringing a TSA-approved suitcase and a backpack, I didn't have to stand in line to drop my luggage off. Additionally, the TSA was quite easy, as it was not crowded at all, and the TSA officers were a lot more calm and helpful than they are sometimes. In fact, I managed to get through TSA in roughly 15 minutes, which if you've ever been to an airport, especially Charlotte Douglas, that's very impressive, as it sometimes takes over an hour to get through. And since I had gotten through TSA so quickly, I now had around 2 hours to kill before I needed to be at the gate. So I first started by just walking around the airport. Of course, one of the busiest airports in the world, there's quite a lot to see and do, with a ton of restaurant options and shops. After walking around for a little while, I stopped at the Chick-fil-A and ate breakfast. After around an hour, I took off and explored the airport some more. This was actually my very first time flying alone, as every other time I flew, I was with my parents, so this was a really neat experience since I was on my own and could go wherever, but eventually I made my way to the gate 30 minutes before it opened and waited there. Once the gate opened and my number was called, I boarded the plane and soon after, the plane took off. Overall, the flight was rather ordinary, although there was a baby crying while a flight attendant was giving life vest instructions, which I was scared since I didn't have to deal with it, crying, which I was scared since I didn't want to have to deal with it crying for the whole flight. Luckily, it fell asleep soon before we took off, making this flight very relaxing and easy. Then after a short flight, we landed in Orlando. Now, the Orlando airport is very weird in that the terminals are away from the main area where TSA and a lot of the shops and restaurants are. However, they can easily be accessed through a light rail, as each terminal has its own designated train connecting it to the main hub. So I boarded the train and went to the main hub. After walking some stairs, I found someone from my company holding a flag and followed that direction, where I got signed in and then waited on the bus to take me to the hotel. Once the bus came, I boarded and was transported to the hotel. I'm not going to say which hotel we stayed at, but I will say that this is a super massive 5-star resort in southwest Orlando, not far from Disney World. However, despite being ginormous, this hotel was surprisingly very easy to navigate and find where I needed to be, although it did often require me to walk quite a distance between places. But once I got my key, I headed up to my room I'd be staying for the trip, and it was nice. It was a typical 2-bed hotel room with a TV, bathroom, and a window that overlooked the courtyard of downtown Orlando. So it was a pretty cool room. I didn't have anything to do for the next hour, so I just chilled until the next thing came up. Soon that next thing did come up, being a social, so I went down to one of the conference rooms and attended the social. It was a huge room with a lot of music, a lot of food, a lot of drinks, and a lot of people. I didn't know anyone, so I kinda just minded my business. I started by getting in line for drinks, as they had a huge bar filled with basically any alcohol you wanted. I obviously didn't order any alcohol since I'm of course underage, so I just got an iced water and then went over to some the tables, where they had mini cheeseburgers, where I picked up a few and then went to a table to sit down. Food was pretty good, nothing much to comment on, but at this point, I still hadn't met anyone yet, so I was still kind of alone. However, the conference room also had a ton of games, including some basketball hoops and skee ball, so I went over to one of the skee ball sets and played around. However, on my first throw, I ended up getting the ball into one of the 10,000 pointers, gaining the attention of a group of guys beside the machine. They all celebrated with me, and then I finished the round with around 25,000 points. They then congratulated me and invited me to their group, so for the rest of the social, I talked with them all. Now, I don't quite remember exactly how many people were in this group, but I think they were 5 of them. Pretty sure 2 of them were out of New York, another was out of Chicago, and a third was out of Boston. By the way, I'd say roughly 75% of the attendees here were either from New York, Chicago, or Boston, as these were my company's biggest offices. In fact, the Charlotte office is one of their smaller offices, as shown here with me being one of only 10 new joiners in the Charlotte office. I think all of them were in audit though, but I was still able to connect with them and have a good time nonetheless. I never saw any of them again, but I certainly enjoyed spending time with them that night. And then came the next day, Tuesday, September 10th. This is the beginning of the actual learning stuff. So that morning, we all gathered into one of the conference rooms. The conference room also connected to the 3 beside it, allowing for one absolutely huge room. We also got to sit at tables with others in our sector, so I got to sit with the other 4 insurance tax new joiners. They were all really cool and very friendly. 2 were in Chicago, 1 was in New York, and the other was in Dallas. Now, honestly, there's not a lot to comment about the actual stuff that went over, as a lot of it was actually more dedicated to soft skills and stuff we learned from the previous Friday call. So with that all said, that night was pretty cool. It was another social, and I don't know how it happened, but I managed to get along really well with 6 fellow new joiners in the Philadelphia office. They were all in audit, however, we had something in common. All 7 of us fucking hate Philadelphia International Airport. If I haven't made it clear enough in the story time, I absolutely despise the Philadelphia Airport. It's extremely dirty and disorganized, there's barely any food options, the TSA here is super rude and unprofessional even for TSA standards, and overall, I just hate this airport. And these guys wholeheartedly hate this airport too, as we spent a good while talking about it and the other airports we don't like, as well as airports we do actually kind of like. All 6 of them actually stopped in Charlotte on their way to Orlando, and they were all big fans of the airport. While I'm of course critical with Charlotte Douglas, I can't deny that it does at least offer a lot once you get past TSA, so I can't really blame them too much. Of course I selected Toronto as the best airport I've been to, which interested them all since none of them had been out of the country, so I told them about the interesting stuff about Toronto Pearson and getting off the plane via the stairs and stuff. One of them also really liked the Indianapolis airport, which I can understand since Dad travels a lot and it's his favorite airport. Nonetheless, it was a fun night, and even though I never interacted with them again, it was still cool getting to network with them and talk about our favorite and least favorite airports. Then the next day started off quite similarly from the previous day, where we did more conferences and stuff. However, that afternoon would be when we had probably the most important part of the trip. That being, or not important, but most memorable part of the trip. That being Universal Studios. So at around 3, they took us to Universal Studios Resort, and we got to spend some time there. Now, I'm not a ride person, as I don't ride rides or roller coasters or anything like that, and while we didn't have to go to Universal, I figured I'd go anyway just to walk around and see what's up. So I did, and it was pretty cool. I walked around the park and saw a lot of the rides, as well as got some pictures. However, about an hour into my visit, it began raining, but luckily at the same time, I was also hungry, so I went inside this superhero restaurant, where I ended up meeting 3 others from my company. In fact, the 3 of them worked out of the Raleigh office, so we weren't that far away. 2 of them worked in tax and the other in audit, but it was still nice to meet some other tax people in North Carolina. So we hung out and ate. Honestly, it wasn't that good, especially for the gigantic price of $35 for a burger and fries. Thankfully, my company paid for that, but still, would not recommend it. Afterwards, I said goodbye to them and decided to head back to the hotel. They had a bus that ran from the park to the hotel every 30 minutes, so I called the nearest one and made it back to my hotel, where I began packing my stuff to fly back home the next day. And then came the last day of the trip, being Thursday, September 12th. That morning they did one last conference. Here we could sit wherever, so I just found a random seat at a table with a couple of guys from the Las Vegas office. What was really cool about them is that the Las Vegas office has a casino sector for both tax and audit, which is the only office for the casino sector, and these guys were in the casino sector, meaning they provided services for all like the massive casinos in Vegas. Once the conference was up, the event was officially over. Now, although we had to check out after the conference, we could stay at the hotel until 5 o'clock, which was a good for me since my flight wasn't until 7. Therefore, I just hung out on the sofa for around an hour and a half until I decided that I'd rather wait in the airport. So I got on the bus that was going back and forth and made it back to the airport. Now, I'm very glad I made this decision, as while I still had 4 hours before my flight when I arrived, most of what's in the Orlando airport is before the TSA gates. Therefore, this gave me time to explore and do whatever before getting checked in. After walking around for a bit, I decided to get lunch at the Panda Express, so I did that and chilled there for another hour. During this time, a bird got into the airport and started flying around. It always stayed near the window, so it never got near me or anything, so it was cool and kind of funny. After I finished eating, I made my way to the TSA, where I managed to get through in just 5 minutes. Yeah, I got through TSA in just 5 minutes, and that includes waiting in line. It was hands down the quickest I ever got through a TSA everywhere. I have no idea why it was that fast, but I sure am not complaining at all. The TSA agents were also calm and even friendly and professional, so I had a really good experience getting checked in here. Then I had more time to kill beyond the gates. I first took the light rail to my terminal, and then found my gate. Afterwards, I walked around the terminal some to see where all the other flights were heading, and just to kill time. There were also a couple restaurants and stores at the terminal, so I looked through the stores and even got some ice cream from Wendy's. Then around 2 hours later, I boarded the plane and flew back home to Charlotte. It was a very easy ride home with no babies crying, so it was peaceful. Once I made it back home, I traversed through the airport and then made it onto the pickup area, where my parents were waiting. They welcomed me home and we talked about the trip while they drove me back to my apartment. Once I arrived back, I unpacked and was officially finished with the training. Overall, this was a fun week, as I had a blast in Orlando. This is my first time in Florida in over 9 years, and my first time in Orlando ever. I also enjoyed networking with my fellow new joiners, learning more about the company, and visiting Universal Studios. So yeah, that was a fun week. For the rest of the month, I pretty much focused on new joiner training. I wasn't on any client work just yet, so I mostly spent my time doing training. I'd also start going into the office twice a week, being Tuesdays and Fridays as my in-office days. Of course, going into the office was usually super convenient since I'm only a 10-minute walk from the office, although it could be a little weird since I have to actually reserve a space before going in. And that wraps up September. Overall, it was a decent month. The wreck and scrapping my truck certainly took points away from this month, but starting my new job and of course going to Orlando were definitely what made this month good. So for that, I'll give this month a 4 out of 10. Again, not a bad month, but certainly not the best. The best day of this month though was a very easy pick, being Thursday, September 12th. It was really nice going back home after the trip, and I had a really good experience at the Orlando airport, so that's why this was the best day of the month. I'm gonna take one more water break. And then we hit October. Now, this month was unfortunately not good at all. Of course, being without a car really sucked, but it would also be this month when I started to see the bad side of my job. So let's talk about what happened. So as previously mentioned, I was in an interesting position at this company, as besides the managing partner, I was the only insurance tax employee in the entire Charlotte office. While this would have been absolutely awesome if I was a senior or a manager, since I'd be able to work from home 5 days a week, this was absolutely terrible for me as a first-year associate. By far the biggest reason is because I didn't have anyone I could call a mentor. At every other job I've had, I've always had a mentor or a group of mentors to help me. Of course, Dad and his coworkers served as my mentors during my internship. The graduate assistants and my boss at the tutoring department served as my mentors for tutoring, and my managers at the bookstore and grocery store served as my mentors for me at those jobs. But here, while I was technically had the people and the clients I was assigned as mentors, they weren't in person to help me out, as they were across the country. As a result, I did not get to interact with them that much, leaving me all alone in the office. It also made learning how to do my job exponentially more challenging, as I learn best when I have someone beside me showing me what to do. Conversely, I do not learn that well online, especially when it's something very complex like tax engagements. Another reason this was a problem was because it posed a barrier in getting accustomed to the culture. So being the only insurance tax person in my office, I had nobody that I could really relate to. Meanwhile, everyone else was on a team with others in their office. These people would often sit together, go out to lunch together, and just be friends. Whereas I was all alone and didn't have anyone. This made me feel incredibly lonely and isolated, as I honestly felt like an outsider who didn't really belong at the company. A third reason this is an issue was more of a long-term issue. So during our first year, the firm is in charge of assigning us clients and getting us on projects. However, after our first year, we're expected to network with others in our line of service in order to find work. This immediately struck me as an issue when I learned about this, as with me being the only insurance tax employee in Charlotte, I have literally no networking opportunities to get with other insurance tax employees. This then begged the question, how the fuck am I supposed to find work? After all, I have nobody to network with to get on projects, so how am I going to find client work if I have no opportunities to network with others? So those are the 3 reasons why I was not too happy about being the only insurance tax employee in the Charlotte office. But in addition to this, there's also another reason too, that being the work itself. So this would be the month when I started doing client work, and I quickly realized this was not for me whatsoever. While I enjoyed my tax class back in college, I quickly realized that I didn't like working in tax, as I wasn't interested or passionate about the work I was doing. Additionally, my tax class covered only individual tax, not corporate tax. Corporate tax is a completely different field that consists of completely different issues than individuals. As a result, I realized very quickly that I did not like any of this at all, and I sure in hell did not want to do this for the rest of my life or even temporarily because it's incredibly boring and uninteresting. I also felt like I was extremely underqualified. Now, imposter syndrome is something that everyone experiences when they start at a Big 4 firm. However, in my case, I truly felt like I was not qualified to be in this role I was in, especially when terms like DTAs, DTLs, permanent differences, temporary differences, and valuation allowances were being thrown around. The only exposure I ever got to this from college was in a single chapter from Intermediate Accounting 3 back during the fall of 2023 semester, and I had since forgotten most of it. Hell, I still don't even know what a valuation allowance is, nor do I really care now for a reason I'll discuss when we get to December. I think had I done a master's in accountancy, which is what most people do, I likely would have been more qualified since I would have known this stuff. Now, in addition to tax, I also don't even like accounting in of itself. This might come as a complete shock to everyone, especially since I've been quite passionate about my major and my studies for the 4 years I've been doing Storytime, but I honestly do not like accounting at all, even though I majored in it back in college. I originally majored in it because I thought it would be a math-heavy field, only discovered that accounting majors literally use the least amount of math compared to every other business major, and I'm not making that up, as my peers in supply chain management, business analytics, and even my fucking marketing peers use more math than accountants. Yeah, who would have known that a field known for using a lot of math actually uses barely any besides addition and subtraction? This became especially the case when I learned some Calc 2 and 3 topics at the beginning of 2024, and found myself way more interested in it than any of my accounting classes, which is when I felt that I had made a huge mistake in majoring in accounting. I stayed in accounting through, though, since it was my last semester and I already had this job lined up, but it was the worst feeling in the world knowing I spent so much time and money obtaining my degree only to realize I didn't even like my field of study. Additionally, during this month in November, I taught myself the entirety of Calc 1, and found myself far more interested in it than any of the CPA material I was doing. Hell, I enjoyed my economics classes far more than my accounting classes, since they required a lot more math. If I redid college, I know for sure I would not have majored in accounting, as I'd instead have double majored in finance and economics, since I find those fields much more interesting than accounting. And speaking of the CPA exam, I was consistently studying around 1 hour a day, and I hated it with everything. While part of it was related to the videos, as I find the videos on Becker to be extremely cringy and useless, I also just hated the material and had no desire whatsoever to become a CPA. I tried every section of the CPA exam, and none of them were even remotely interesting to me. It was just the same, and it was the same and some more advanced boring material from college. As a result of all this, I felt really bad and felt that I had made a huge mistake in majoring in accounting. However, I eventually got over this in December, when I was able to use my degree to fix my issue. So today, I no longer regret my major, besides a couple of things, although I still would not choose accounting if I redid college. Now, I do want to go ahead and say that for the record, I have absolutely no issues with anyone at this company or the company itself. In fact, everyone I interacted with were great people and very nice. I also had no issues with any clients either. The issues I had were simply because of my personal reasons and being the only insurance tax employee in Charlotte. I'm sure whoever put me in insurance tax meant absolutely no harm, They likely just didn't realize that there's nobody else in insurance in Charlotte, so it was just an honest mistake on their part. Just want to make it known that I have no problems with the company itself or the people I worked with, since I know a lot of people leave companies for that reason, but that was not one of my reasons, as I was treated very well by the people I worked with and interacted with. Now, as you might expect with me being lonely at work and regretting my major, this took a huge toll on my mental health, and a huge toll it did. My mental health during this time was extremely bad and had plummeted very far down. Due to the severity of the situation, and due to how recent this was, I'm not going to discuss the details of what was happening, but I will say that I was going through a lot during this time, and my problems with the job started dominating my personal life. Thankfully, things got way better in December, and I'll talk about why in a bit. Now, while my job was fucking me in the ass, I did at least have a good thing happen this month. So I got back in therapy this month as a result of everything. I told my therapist what was happening and how I was feeling. I also told her about coming out as bi. That's when she suggested a local organization for LGBTQ youth. So I took a lot into it and felt that this would be a great place to meet others who were also queer and just get me out of my apartment. The only problem was that this place was that it's in East Charlotte, but it's luckily easily accessible via public transportation, so I decided to do that. And that's what I did on Friday, October 25th. The moment I walked into the place, I was immediately welcomed and felt at home. Hell, the place's environment was just relaxing and made me feel very calm, and meeting people here is super easy as well, as everyone's very social and open for conversations, allowing me to make friends literally my first visit. I'd start going here and continue to go here on weekends, as it's a fantastic way to talk with others and to decompress too, thanks to its calm and accepting atmosphere. They also have a Discord server too that I've been a part of as well, so this community has been excellent for me, even if I'm on the older side since I'm of course 20 years old, although the place is for those up to 24, so I can continue going here for the next few years I want. And that wraps up October. Again, this is not my best month, as my job really started to kick my ass and started to negatively affect me. This month would have been a 1 out of 10, but thanks to discovering the queer community and getting along well with them, I'll give this month a 2 out of 10. This was the worst month of the year for me, which is why it gets such a low rating. As for the best day, that would have to go to Friday, October 25th, the day I joined the queer group, as that night would be super fun and just made me feel like I belonged somewhere, which was an especially great feeling after everything I was dealing with at work. That then brings us to November. November would also not be a particularly good month due to my job, as it would pick up even more than it would drive my mental health further down. However, this month still had an absolutely massive W at the end of the month that really made the entire month. But before I talk about by far the biggest thing that happened this month, I first want to talk about work. So in the middle of the month, my office hosted the field day for all the tax employees, where we got to play games like kickball, capture the flag, and other stuff. The teams were split by sector, so there would be a team dedicated to asset and wealth management, another dedicated to state and local tax, another one for transfer pricing, and more. Now in my case, being the only insurance tax employee, I teamed up with the transfer pricing people. Overall, it was a very fun day, as I got to interact with and get to know some of the transfer pricing people, and I had a fun time overall. Afterwards, we went to a nearby restaurant to have happy hour. It was a really fun happy hour, as I sat at a table with a few people and got along very well with them. Overall, it was a fun time, and I'm very glad I attended this field day, as I got to meet others in the Charlotte office and have a day just to avoid work and have fun. However, while I had success in meeting others and getting along with others, it made me feel more isolated, as it solidified the fact that yes, I'm all alone in the Charlotte office, as nobody else works in insurance tax except me. Meanwhile, everyone else at Field Day had their group, as they all worked together and did things together, so it really put it in perspective that yeah, I really am alone. Nonetheless, the event was still a blast and I had fun, so I got out of it. Now let's talk about by far the best thing that happened this month, as well as the single event that carried this whole month. So by mid-November, I had accumulated enough money to buy a car, and so I began my car search. I found a used 2017 Honda Civic that I really liked at CarMax, so I decided to check it out and do a drive test. My parents took me to CarMax when they returned me to my apartment the day after Thanksgiving on Friday, November 29th. I did the test drive, and the car drove very well, far better than my truck for sure, with it, of course, being newer. Therefore, after a little bit of thinking, I decided I wanted to buy it. I had enough for a 40% down payment, and that's what I did. However, there was one problem. I needed my social security card. Therefore, I had to wait until the next day to get it. Thankfully, I had my social security card with me in my apartment, so I was able to get it, and then the next day, November 30th, I was able to get an Uber to take me back to CarMax. Here I was able to finalize the sale and officially purchase my new car, and holy fuck, was it such an incredible feeling to finally have my own car after going almost 3 months without a vehicle. And the best part is that this car is absolutely sick. It drives way better than my old truck, has far better mileage, and it also has better brakes and gas. It also supports Apple CarPlay and even has backup cameras and cameras for right turns, making it a lot safer too. And of course it fixed my problem with feeling trapped in uptown Charlotte, as with it, I can now drive anywhere I want, which felt super liberating. When I first bought the car, I first drove around Mint Hill with it. Mint Hill is a quiet little town in east of Charlotte, so I figured that this would be the perfect place to test out the car. And it was, as I got used to the roads here, as I used the roads here to get used to the features and just drive the car in itself. I also got on I-485 here to test out the cruise control and other highway features, and it worked great too. Everything worked great, so I then took it back to my apartment and got it registered for parking. Once I did that, I headed off to my queer group, where I was able to show it off to my friends, all of whom were really excited for me and jealous. Ultimately, I think I made an incredible decision in getting the 2017 Honda Civic, as it's a very reliable car that will last me a very long time, even if it already has 100,000 miles on it. After all, Hondas are made to last a long time, and I know I'll definitely be able to drive this thing for a while, and it's certainly something I get used to with how great of a car it is. But unbeknownst to me at the time, while I was happy with my purchase, the truth is that this purchase would go on to be literally the greatest purchase of my life. Not only would this car help me with me being able to get around and stuff, but it would also help me out with my job situation. I'll explain how that happened in a bit. But that wraps up November. Overall, it had the same issues as October with work, but field day was nice. Of course, buying the new car was hands down the best thing from this month, as it should come to no surprise that the best day of this month was Saturday, November 30th, the day I bought my Civic. In fact, just because of the car, this month was far better than October despite me facing the same mental health issues. So for that, I'll give this month a 5 out of 10. And that brings us to the last month of the year, December. So while the previous couple months had not been good for me, this month would be when things took a complete 180, as this month would be absolutely amazing and put me back on a great path. However, it wouldn't be until a little bit later in the month when things got better. For the first few days, things were pretty bad. In fact, Tuesday, December 3rd was probably the single worst day of 2024, as I had a very extreme mental breakdown that night after a very tough and stressful day at work. Again, I'm not going to be revealing what specifically went on during this breakdown or what was going through my head since this was very recent, but it was extremely bad and by far my lowest point of 2024, even rivaling many of my mental breakdowns I had during my suicidal phase back in 8th grade. I will, however, talk about how it ended, as it felt really supernatural. Around 2 hours after the lockdown started, I was still in my head and going through it when all of a sudden, I heard Mom's voice say, "Everything's gonna be okay." And even more crazier was that the voice was very calm and comforting. This caught me by surprise, as Mom has always been the more dominant parent while Dad's usually been the more comforting one. So hearing Mom's voice be calm and comfort me certainly surprised me. But in addition to that voice, I felt like someone had their arms wrapped around me. I was completely alone in my apartment for the entirety of the breakdown, so it wasn't like anyone heard me, and most definitely not Mom since she was of course back at her house. But none of this really creeped me out. Instead, the moment after I heard Mom's voice, every single muscle in my body relaxed and I immediately became calm. Everything became dead silent as I eased up and found myself able to relax. A wind of serenity flew through my brain as it repeated those words. It was by far the most supernatural experience I've ever had, as while I've had a long history of mental breakdowns back in middle school, college, and of course here, I've never been comforted from one by a voice that just randomly played in my head. Nonetheless, I very quickly came to my senses after the fact and figured I should try to take my mind off work and everything going on in life. So I put some winter clothes on and headed to my car to drive around. This did exactly that, as it took my mind off everything. And what's great about all this though is that everything in fact would be okay. A couple days later, I had a therapy appointment, where my therapist suggested I most definitely need to find a new job, so I decided to follow her advice and apply for a few positions. With me now having a car, getting places was no longer an issue, meaning I could look anywhere. That's also why I didn't apply for any new jobs prior, as I was very limited due to me not having a car. Anyways, I luckily managed to get an interview with a really small company, who reached out to me that day after I applied. We then scheduled an online interview for the following week, which I of course participated in. Honestly, I did not think I did that well in this interview, as I stumbled on my words a bit and had a tough time explaining a couple things. But as it would turn out, I did far better than I expected, as they invited me for an in-person interview, so I took their offer up and did the interview at the end of the week. Now, contrary to the online interview, I knew immediately after the interview that I did absolutely phenomenally, as on top of knowing the interviewers really liked me, I also really liked the interviewers and the company. This interview was an incredibly fun experience, as I pretty much knew that just from this interview that I 100% belonged here and felt at home. I got along extremely well with the interviewers and even had fun during this interview. Yes, I had fun in a goddamn interview. That's not supposed to happen, as interviews are supposed to be stressful, but no, this one was fun and made me feel like I belonged, something I did not have at my current job. I also came across a lot of green flags when I was asking questions, especially the first question when I asked about the culture. The interviewers were more than excited to talk about the culture, going a whole 30 minutes just talking about it and the things they do as a company, which really struck me as a massive green flag, because if they're this eager to talk about the culture, that tells me that they love the company and they are very proud of the culture. Additionally, we also went 30 minutes overtime. This is also a green flag in an interview, because if you're going over in an interview, that means the interviewers are very interested, since they're willing to spend extra time to get to know you and introduce you to the firm. So yeah, this interview went absolutely amazing. In fact, it was hands down the best interview I've ever done, even better than the tutoring interview, which was also a fantastic interview. And to no surprise, I got a call from one of the interviewers later that day telling me I got the job. I was very excited and satisfied, knowing my time in public accounting was finally coming to an end, and the fact that I would be able to work at a place where I could do more meaningful work and fit in. This was absolutely what I needed, and literally the best thing I could have ever asked for, and I was so glad to finally get it. So, then what's this job about? Well, the company I accepted my offer with is a really small company in Charlotte that provides consulting and financial services for doctors and other healthcare providers who run their own individual practices. As for my particular role, I'm a financial analyst. In this role, I do financial planning tasks such as forecast, budget analysis, and cost analysis for clients. Earlier in the story time, I expressed regret for majoring in accounting, and while I still do some accounting in the form of bookkeeping, this job is actually a finance position, meaning I technically don't work in accounting anymore, as I instead work in finance, which is what I wish I studied instead. Nonetheless, my accounting degree helped me immensely with getting this job, since accounting still plays an important role, which is exactly why I no longer regret majoring in accounting, since I was able to use it to pivot out of accounting. Additionally, the accounting I do at this job is financial accounting, which I'm a lot more familiar with, better at, and even more than tax accounting like what I was doing during this time, and it's certainly bearable and easy to get the hang of. Speaking of which, this job hunting experience taught me a very valuable lesson about college that Mom has been trying to teach me for a very long time. Never ever doubt the power of a 4-year degree. Sure, I may not have a finance degree, but I'm still able to get a finance job using some transferable skills and just having a bachelor's degree. In fact, one thing I noticed in my job search is that most positions don't even require a specific degree. They actually permit any bachelor's degree as long as you have the necessary skills and experiences. Like, the only jobs that require a specific degree are doctors, lawyers, engineers, and accountants working in public accounting. Every other job can be attained with any degree as long as you can pivot your knowledge and experience to that job. So even though I'm probably not going to do much accounting in the future when I start doing more complex analysis related work like what my boss does, the fact that my resume says bachelor's degree is really all I need to be successful, as any bachelor's degree, so long as it's from an accredited college or university, is absolutely worth the price and will put you on the path to success. This also explains why a good majority of college graduates work in jobs unrelated to their degree, as most jobs of course don't require specific degrees, they require specific skills. Now, this position has very similar benefits to my Big 4 tax job. I make the same amount of money plus bonuses, have 15 vacation days, and it comes with health insurance. However, if you do the math to calculate my hourly rate, it's actually a lot higher here, since I'll be working a lot less hours than my public accounting job. In public accounting, there's a busy season, which for tax is 7 months out of the year, usually between January to April and then from August to October. During busy seasons, employees are required to work a minimum of 60 hours a week, with hours often get into the 70 and 80 range. This job, on the other hand, is a typical 8 to 5 job with no regular overtime, meaning I make the same amount of money for less hours, which is really nice since I'm being paid more fairly here. Additionally, besides the salespeople and consultants, everyone who works here is in Charlotte, meaning I get to interact with the same people every day and get to know and work with them, which I've done very easily over the past couple weeks I've been here. Compare that to my old public accounting job where I was the only person in my line of service in the office. This has been by far the biggest benefit from this company since I am able to receive hands-on training and have mentors, allowing me to learn far easier and do much more here than I did at my old public accounting job. It's a very small company too, allowing me to have an easier time meeting others and be able to make a much bigger impact too. It'll also be more meaningful and impactful work too, as I'm helping doctors run and maintain their practices so that they can keep providing care to patients, as opposed to helping huge insurance corporations who make billions in profits a year pay less in taxes. This position is also 100% in the office, which I really like because not only do I just prefer working in the office as opposed to working remotely, but it's also made easier to learn my job duties and of course meet others. Now, the only downside is that I do have to commute here, as it's not in uptown Charlotte. Thankfully, I of course have a car now, which makes this commute possible and comfortable. I also personally like commuting from my internship this past summer. Whenever I wasn't talking with Dad, I would usually plan out what I hoped to accomplish that day on the ride to work. Then when going home, I took the commute time to decompress, think about what I accomplished that day, and switch my mind into my personal life, allowing me to have a fantastic work-life balance during my internship. And I've since resumed that at this job, as the commute allows me to establish a work-life balance a lot easier and be able to clearly separate my work life from my personal life. So yeah, this opportunity was an incredible one and one that I absolutely needed during this time. Mom's voice was 100% right when it said that everything is going to be okay, as sure enough, everything turned out to be great, and it would also be because of this opportunity that made the whole rest of the month of December a super good month, as my excitement for starting at this company built up and excitement for leaving my public accounting job. I started this job on January 6th, and man has it been such a great job and far better than my old public accounting job. The difference I've seen in myself, my attitude towards work, and my mental health have all drastically changed for the better, and I'm looking forward to seeing future benefits as I spend more time with this company. Now, once I accepted my offer, I began counting my days down at my public accounting job, with one countdown being when I put my 2 weeks notice in, and the second being when my last day with the firm was. I officially put my 2 weeks notice in on Friday, December 20th. I sent my notice to HR, my development leader, and to each of the teams I was on. All of them were sad to see me go, but fully understood my reasons, and all of them wished me well on the next chapter of my life. To be honest, I was kind of expecting to receive positive responses since everyone I worked with at this firm was great. I was also expecting to hear a little backlash because I was leaving at by far the most inconvenient time possible for the company, with me putting my 2 weeks notice right before the holidays and me leaving the company the work day before busy season. But I never heard any of that, as everyone truly cared and wished me well, which was very satisfying and good since at least I was able to put my notice in on a positive note despite the challenges from this job. Additionally, I hope the firm uses some of the feedback I provided in my notice to make better decisions. While there were some personal reasons for me leaving, the main reason was the culture and me feeling alone. Hopefully the firm will use that feedback so when they're making deployment decisions for new hires, they can place them on teams with a significant presence in their office. In fact, had I been placed on a team with a significant presence in Charlotte like asset and wealth management or banking and capital markets, I'm 100% sure that I'd still be at this company since I would have had a much easier time meeting others and getting accustomed to the culture. Albeit, I'd probably leave after I become a senior since I of course do not like tax, but I definitely would not be leaving 4 months after starting and right before busy season like I did in insurance, since I'd at least have a team in the office to work with. I did also notify the other new joiners of the news. They were also sad to see me go too, but they wished me well and supported me like everyone else. So yeah, everyone took my notice very well, especially right before busy season, so I do have to applaud them for doing so since this could be a super inconvenient time for me to leave as the firm prepares for busy season. My last day with the firm was Friday, January 3rd, and God was this day super satisfying, as I was finally ending a job that had caused me to go through so much. And again, I can't stress just how much things have changed since I started my new job, as it's been such a great difference, and I truly feel like leaving my old company was absolutely the right decision. I trusted my gut, and it worked out well. And that's also my biggest piece of advice for anyone in a similar position as me. Just trust your gut. If you think that your job is not working out, don't be afraid to search somewhere else, as you should always place your mental health and well-being above anything else. Then for the rest of the year, I was off. So I took that Monday, December 23rd, and Tuesday, December 24th off since it was right around Christmas. And I did not return to work until Thursday, January 2nd, the day before I left. The reason is because the firm does a firm-wide shutdown between Christmas and New Year's, meaning I get the week off, which was quite nice. I went to my parents' house on Christmas Eve and spent the holidays with them. We had an absolute blast, with me bringing my Switch home for us four playing Mario Kart, as well as just having fun. Christmas Day was also great too. And that pretty much wraps up December. This month was wild, as it started out very rough, but it quickly got way better. So much so that despite the bad stuff, this was one of the best months of 2024, which is wild since December is usually an okay-ish month. The best day of this month was hands down Friday, December 13th, as this was the day I had the in-person interview and got the job offer. Overall, I'll give this month a 9 out of 10 because man, it felt amazing getting the new job. And that officially wraps up 2024. Man, this year was just absolutely insane. So many crazy events, huge milestones, and accomplishments occurred left and right to culminate a single year that was more chaotic than the last 6 years combined. Yeah, this year was insane, but despite it having some low points in quarter 4, this year was absolutely phenomenal. In fact, 2024 was such a good year for me that I could say with certainty that this year was the best year of my life, even surpassing incredibly good years such as 2019 and 2021. Now, with 2024 in the books, what's up for 2025? Well, definitely nowhere near as much as 2024, that's for sure. As great as 2024 was, I definitely need a break from the craziness and have a more relaxed year, and I think 2025 will certainly be pretty relaxing. So far, I've gotten along very well with the new job, so I expect things to calm down soon. As for later this year, in May, I'm going to be moving. While I love living in uptown Charlotte, the commute can be quite hectic, as traffic is almost seems like it's worse going the opposite direction. So I'm hoping to move out of uptown and possibly out of Charlotte entirely for the suburbs. I've eyed a couple places east of Charlotte, which would not only be closer to work, but I'd also be saving hundreds in rent too, so I'm planning to do that in May when my lease comes up. Then for the rest of the year, should be easy going with a little bit of fun stuff, such as a cruise I'm going on this summer for my sister's high school graduation in June, as well as a possible road trip this summer with my new car that I still need to do more research on. So yeah, that's all for the story time. Thank you all